The chains on my wrists were made of something that hummed, a low current that made my teeth ache every time I pulled against them. I did not remember losing the fight. I remembered the flash of the tractor beam swallowing my ship whole, and then waking up on my knees in a hall built for giants. My name is Callum Ashford, and I was a cargo pilot, not a soldier, not a hero, just a man who flew supply routes between human colonies and the edge of nowhere. That night, nowhere had a queen. The hall stretched so high above me that the ceiling disappeared into shadow. Pillars of black stone lined the walls, each one carved with symbols that shifted when I was not looking directly at them. Guards stood on either side of me, tall insectoid figures with plated skin the color of wet slate, their eyes faceted and cold. Nobody spoke. The silence pressed on my ears harder than any noise could have. Then the doors at the far end opened, and the air itself seemed to change. She walked in without hurry, without guards of her own, because she did not need any. Her skin held a faint shimmer, like scales catching candlelight, and her eyes were a deep violet that seemed to look through me rather than at me. She wore no crown, no obvious symbol of rule, and yet every creature in that hall bent slightly toward her, the way plants bend toward the sun. I later learned her name was Cyril Vanthacore, but that night I only knew her as the Queen. She stopped in front of me and studied my face the way someone studies a puzzle piece that does not seem to fit anywhere. The guards on either side of me stiffened, waiting for me to fall to my knees the way, I assumed, every other prisoner had. I did not kneel, partly because the chains made it hard to move, and partly because some stubborn part of my brain refused to give her the satisfaction. She tilted her head. Her voice, when it came, was smooth and low, carrying an accent I could not place, each word measured like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. "Be careful, human," she said. "I am not just any woman. I am the Queen who chose you." The hall went utterly silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. I looked at her, at the chains, at the guards, and I laughed. It was not a brave laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out of a person who is too tired and too frightened to filter his own mouth. "Chose me for what, exactly?" I said. "Dinner? Because if that is the plan, I have to warn you, I am mostly gristle." For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the guards made a strange clicking sound, something between a gasp and a growl, and I realized, far too late, that laughing at the Queen in her own throne room might not have been the wisest decision of my short and complicated life. But the Queen did not order my death. She simply stared at me, violet eyes narrowing, as if I had spoken in a language she did not expect a prisoner to know. "You find this amusing," she said. "I find it strange," I answered, because I could not think of anything smarter to say. Where I come from, choosing someone usually means asking first. Her advisors, a cluster of tall, robed figures standing near the throne, began murmuring among themselves, low and urgent. One of them, an older figure with a long scar running down one side of his jaw, stepped forward and spoke in their own language, sharp and fast. The Queen raised one hand, and he fell silent instantly, though his eyes stayed fixed on me with open hostility. She took a step closer, close enough that I could see the shimmer of her skin was not paint or ornament, but something living, shifting slightly with her breathing. "Every creature in this empire feels my presence and yields to it," she said. "It is not a request. It is not a choice they make. It simply happens, the way a leaf turns toward light. Yet you stand here, chained, weaponless, surrounded, and you do not yield." I did not know what to say to that, so I told the truth. "Maybe I am just too stubborn to notice," I said. She studied me a moment longer, and something flickered behind her eyes, something that looked, strangely, like curiosity rather than anger. She turned to the scarred advisor and gave a short command in her language. He looked as though he wanted to argue, then bowed stiffly and stepped back. "Take him to the East Chamber," she said, this time in words I understood, clearly meant for my ears. "Alive, unharmed." The guards pulled me up by the arms and marched me out of the hall, my boots dragging slightly against the smooth black floor. I twisted my head back once and caught the Queen watching me leave, her expression unreadable, her eyes still narrowed in that same puzzled focus. as if I were an equation she had not finished solving. The east chamber turned out to be less of a prison cell and more of a room, with a wide window looking out over a city of towers wrapped in soft blue light. The chains were removed from my wrists, though 2 guards remained posted outside the door. I sat on the edge of a low stone bench and tried to slow my breathing, tried to make sense of what had just happened. I did not have long to wonder. Within the hour, the door opened, and the Queen entered alone. The guards outside did not follow her in. She closed the door behind her with her own hand, a small gesture that felt oddly significant, as if she rarely did anything without an audience. I stood, unsure whether I was supposed to bow, kneel, or simply stand there like an idiot. I chose the idiot option, since it required the least guessing. "You confuse my court," she said, without preamble, standing near the window, the blue light of the city catching the shimmer of her skin. "Good to know I am causing chaos on my first day," I said. She turned to look at me, and for the first time I noticed something almost like amusement pulling at the corner of her mouth, quickly suppressed. "My presence carries a certain weight," she said. "Every species we have encountered feels it instinctively. Obedience, devotion, sometimes fear, sometimes worship, but always yielding. It has been this way since before I was born, and my mother before me, and hers before that. It is not vanity, human. It is simply how things are. And with me," I said, "it just does not work." "It does not," she said, and there was something almost frustrated in the way she said it, as if my failure to bow was a personal insult to a law of nature. I leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, trying to look calmer than I felt. "Maybe it is not about you," I said. "Maybe it is just how humans are built. We do not do well with being told what to feel. Tell a human he has to admire someone, and something in him digs in his heels just to prove he does not have to." She crossed the room slowly, studying me the way a scientist studies an unexpected result. "Then convince me," she said. "Why should anyone follow a ruler who cannot compel them to?" I thought about that question longer than I expected to. Was not a trick question, not from her. She actually wanted to know. "Because they want to," I said finally, "not because they have to. Where I come from, the leaders people actually respect are the ones people could walk away from, and choose to stay anyway." She was quiet for a long moment, violet eyes fixed on me, unreadable again. Then she turned and walked to the window, looking out over her city of towers and blue light. "No one has ever had the option to walk away from me," she said quietly, almost to herself. I did not have an answer for that, so I said nothing, and for a while, we simply stood there together, the silence between us feeling different than the silence in the throne room had, less dangerous, more like 2 people simply thinking. Over the following days, she returned often, always alone, always with questions. She asked about human history, about wars fought not for conquest but for freedom, about leaders who lost power because their people simply decided to choose someone else. Each answer seemed to unsettle something in her, the way a single loose thread unsettles an entire woven cloth. I learned things about her too, that she had never once, in her long life, met an equal. That every conversation she had ever had was shaped, without her subjects even realizing it, by the invisible pressure of her presence. That she did not know, could not know, whether anyone had ever truly liked her, or simply been unable to feel anything else. "That is a lonely way to live," I told her once, during one of those long evenings by the window. She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was quieter than I had heard it before. "I did not know it was lonely," she said, "until you refused to bow." One evening she asked me to walk with her through the lower gardens, a place I had not yet seen, tucked beneath the palace where strange silver plants grew in careful rows, tended by workers who bowed low as she passed, but never once looked her in the eye. I noticed that, and I asked her about it. "Do they ever look at you directly?" I said, "or is that against the rules too?" She paused beside a row of plants, running her fingers lightly over one of the silver leaves. "They cannot help it," she said. "My presence is too strong this close. It is easier for them if they do not try." "But you look at me," I said. "Because you do not flinch," she said simply. "Because with you, I do not have to soften anything, or hide anything. I can simply be tired, or curious, or wrong, and you will tell me so." I asked her then what she had wanted, before she became queen, before the crown and the weight of an empire settled onto her shoulders. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she might not answer at all. "I wanted to see other worlds," she admitted finally. "Not conquer them, simply see them. As a girl, before I understood what my presence did to people, I used to imagine walking through a market on some distant planet, completely unnoticed, buying food from a stranger who had no idea who I was. That sounds like a good life," I said. "It sounds like a life I will never have," she said, though there was less bitterness in her voice than I expected, more a quiet kind of acceptance. "Maybe not the whole thing," I said, "but you had a version of it tonight. Walking through a garden with someone who has no idea what half these plants even are, and who is definitely going to ask you 100 more questions before we leave." That got a real laugh out of her, quick and surprised, as if laughter itself were still a foreign country to her. It was a small thing, that laugh, but I found myself thinking about it long after we returned to the palace above, turning it over in my mind, the way a person turns over something rare and unexpected. Not everyone in her court was pleased with these visits. The scarred advisor, whose name I eventually learned was Draven Ossick, made his opposition clear through pointed glances and clipped words whenever we crossed paths in the halls. He believed, quite openly, that my immunity to the Queen's presence was not a curiosity but a threat, a crack in the very foundation of her rule that needed to be sealed, one way or another. He came to my chamber one night, while the Queen was occupied elsewhere, flanked by 2 guards, his scarred face set in a hard line. "You should understand your position, human," he said. "The Queen is curious about you. Curiosity fades. When it does, you will be disposed of, quietly, and the court will return to how it has always been." I looked at him for a long moment, refusing to let the fear show on my face, even though it was very much present in my chest. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe she keeps me around because I am the first person in this entire empire who has ever told her the truth, instead of what she wants to hear. Ask yourself, which one of us actually threatens her rule?" Draven's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, and he left with his guards trailing behind him, though the look he gave me, before the door closed, told me clearly that this was not finished. I told the Queen about the visit the next time she came, and her reaction surprised me. She did not dismiss it, did not brush it off as court politics. Instead, her expression hardened, and something cold passed behind her violet eyes. "He forgets his place," she said. "Maybe he is just scared," I said. "People do strange things when they are scared of losing what they know." She studied me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, small and genuine, the first real smile I had seen from her. "You defend even the man who threatens you," she said. "I am not defending him," I said. "I am just saying I understand him. Doesn't mean I trust him." Weeks passed, though it was hard to measure time properly in a city where the sky never fully darkened, only shifted between shades of blue. I was given more freedom to move through certain parts of the palace, always trailed at a distance by guards who no longer chained me, but never quite let me forget I was still, technically, a prisoner. The Queen and I spoke often, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about nothing at all, and somewhere in those long conversations, the space between us changed shape. I stopped thinking of her only as the Queen who had captured me. I started thinking of her as Cyril, a person who had spent her entire life surrounded by people who could not help but adore her, and who had never once been certain if any of it was real. She, in turn, stopped testing me the way she had at first, stopped watching me like a puzzle to be solved, and started simply talking to me, the way one person talks to another they trust. Then the trouble came. It began with alarms, a deep pulsing sound that rattled through the palace walls in the middle of what passed for night. Guards rushed past my chamber, weapons drawn, voices sharp with urgency. I stepped into the hall just as one of the Queen's attendants hurried by, and I grabbed his arm before he could vanish around the corner. "What is happening?" I demanded. "A rival hive," he said, breathless. "They have entered the outer ring. They mean to challenge her claim to the throne." I did not think. I simply moved, following the flow of guards toward the heart of the palace, toward the throne room where I knew she would be. Draven intercepted me halfway there, his face grim, blocking my path with an outstretched arm. "This is not your fight, human," he said. "Then let me make it my fight," I said, and pushed past him before he could stop me. I reached the throne room to find it in chaos, guards forming defensive lines near the great doors, the queen standing at the center of it all, calm in a way that did not match the danger around her. When she saw me enter, something flickered across her face, surprise, and beneath it, something warmer. "You should not be here," she said. "I did not come because I had to," I said. "I came because I chose to. Remember that part?" For a moment, despite everything happening around us, she almost laughed. The rival hive's forces broke through the outer defenses within the hour, a smaller but vicious contingent, led by a challenger who believed the queen's growing tolerance of outsiders, of me, was proof of weakness that could be exploited. The fighting was fierce, though the queen's guards, and the queen herself, fought with a precision that made it clear exactly why her empire had endured for so long. I was no warrior, but I was not useless either. Years of hauling cargo through dangerous routes had taught me a thing or two about improvising with whatever was at hand, and I used every trick I knew to help hold a corridor, to buy time, to keep myself and the guards near me alive, while the queen dealt with the true source of the threat. When the challenger finally reached the throne room himself, tall and armored, his presence carrying its own oppressive weight, it was the queen who met him, standing tall and unafraid, and it was the queen who ended the confrontation, swift and final, without unnecessary cruelty, simply the certainty of a ruler who had never once doubted her own strength, only, until recently, her own worth. When the alarms finally fell silent and the palace began to settle back into stillness, I found her standing alone near the great doors, looking out over the damage done to her hall, her shoulders lowered in a way I had not seen before, something like exhaustion, or relief, or both. I walked over and stood beside her, saying nothing at first, simply letting the quiet exist between us. "You could have left," she said eventually, not looking at me. "When the fighting started, there were exits. No one would have stopped you." "I know," I said. "Why did you stay?" she asked. I thought about all the answers I could give, the easy ones, the safe ones, and decided none of them were true enough. "Because somewhere between that first night in your throne room and now, I stopped seeing you as the queen who captured me," I said. "I started seeing you as someone I actually wanted to stand beside. Not because your presence made me feel that way, because I chose it, every single day, on my own." She turned to look at me then, violet eyes bright in the dim light, and for the first time since I had met her, there was no distance in her expression at all, no calculation, no weight of rule pressing down between us. Just her. "You said something to me, the first night," she said quietly. "Be careful, human. I am not just any woman. I am the queen who chose you." I meant it as a warning then, a statement of power. "And now?" I asked. "Now I understand it differently," she said. "I was not choosing you the way I chose everything else, without effort, without resistance. You were the first thing in my life I ever had to earn." I reached out, slowly, and she did not pull away, and for a long moment we simply stood there together in the quiet aftermath, two people from worlds that were never meant to understand each other, finding, somehow, that they did. In the days that followed, things in the palace began to shift, quietly at first, then with growing clarity. The queen started making decisions differently, asking questions of her advisors, instead of simply issuing commands, listening to disagreement, instead of expecting only agreement. Draven, to his credit, eventually came to accept the change, even if he never fully warmed to me, and I decided that was a fair enough compromise for both of us. As for me, I never did make it back to hauling cargo between human colonies. My ship remained where it had been taken, gathering dust in some hangar I never bothered to visit again. Instead, I stayed in a city of towers and blue light, beside a queen who had once believed that devotion only ever came from power, and who had learned, because of one stubborn, chain-bound, grisly human, that the kind of loyalty worth having was never forced. It was chosen. Every single day, by both of us, all over again.